"Get out!" The manager's voice thundered through the diner as Amelia clutched her bleeding hand, tears streaming down her face. "Customers don't want a waitress who looks like that." She had nowhere left to go. No money, no family, just the ugly burn scar that made strangers stare and potential employers turn her away. That's when he walked in, Jackson Hayes, the billionaire whose face graced magazine covers. His eyes locked on her scarred arm as she gathered her meager belongings. What happened next would change both their lives forever. The morning light spilled through the grimy windows of Rosie's diner, catching the dust motes that danced in the air like forgotten dreams. Amelia Evans moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her faded blue uniform hanging slightly loose on her frame, a silent testament to meals skipped to make rent. The other waitresses called her Ghost, not just for her quiet demeanor but for how she seemed to vanish into the background, serving customers without ever truly being seen. And that's exactly how Amelia preferred it. Invisibility was a skill she had perfected over the years, a necessary adaptation after the accident that had left more than just physical scars. Her left hand clutched the coffee pot with practiced precision, her right arm angled slightly away from customers' view, a habitual movement to hide the burn scar that twisted up from her wrist to her elbow like angry vines claiming territory. The Tuesday morning rush had just begun to ebb when the bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of a customer who didn't belong. In walked a man whose tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Amelia's monthly rent. His confident stride and the way other patrons instinctively glanced up marked him as someone accustomed to attention. Expensive watch glinting on his wrist, leather briefcase in hand. Everything about him screamed wealth and power. Jackson Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovations, had never set foot in a place like Rosie's Diner before. His world consisted of penthouse offices, executive boardrooms, and five-star restaurants where the staff knew his preferences before he spoke them. But today, something had drawn him here, a strange compulsion he couldn't explain, a detour on his way to close the biggest acquisition of his career. "Coffee? Please," he said without looking up, his attention fixed on the documents spread before him, the final details of a merger that would cement his legacy as one of the most formidable business minds of his generation. Amelia approached his table with the same invisible presence she maintained with all customers. "Cream or sugar?" she asked, her voice soft, almost apologetic for the intrusion. "Black," he replied, still not looking up. As she leaned forward to pour, a child at the neighboring table jumped up suddenly, bumping into her elbow. The coffee pot tilted precariously, sending a splash of scalding liquid across the pristine white tablecloth and onto several pages of his important documents. "I'm so sorry," Amelia gasped, horrified. Her hands trembled as she quickly grabbed napkins, desperately trying to blot the spreading stain. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please, let me." It was in this frantic moment that her sleeve rode up, revealing the intricate web of scar tissue that mapped the tragedy etched into her skin years ago. Most customers never noticed Amelia, let alone the careful way she kept her scars hidden. But in her panic to clean up the spill, her defenses slipped. Jackson Hayes finally looked up, irritation flashing across his face. But the expression froze halfway, transforming into something else entirely as his eyes locked on her scarred arm. The color drained from his face as though he'd seen a ghost, his documents forgotten. "That scar," he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. Amelia quickly pulled her sleeve down, shame and embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I'm sorry about your papers. I'll get you a fresh coffee and—" But Jackson Hayes wasn't listening. He rose slowly from his seat, his eyes never leaving her arm, even as she tried to hide it. "Where did you get that scar?" he asked, his voice now trembling with an emotion Amelia couldn't identify. The other patrons were beginning to stare. Rosie, the owner, was already moving toward them, prepared to intervene if this wealthy customer was causing trouble for her staff. "Sir, I don't think—" Amelia began, uncomfortable with the attention. Without warning, Jackson Hayes dropped to his knees beside her table. The gesture was so unexpected, so completely out of place in the dingy diner, that a collective gasp rippled through the room. Here was a man who commanded boardrooms and moved millions with a signature, kneeling on the sticky linoleum floor, looking up at a waitress as though she held the answers to questions he'd been asking his entire life. 15 years ago, he said, his voice cracking with emotion, there was a fire at the Westlake Apartments. I was just starting out, living in the building across the street. I heard the screams and ran inside before the fire department arrived. Amelia's coffee pot clattered to the floor, shattering into pieces that scattered across the tiles like the fragments of memory suddenly crystallizing in her mind. Her hand went instinctively to her scarred arm, feeling the raised tissue beneath the fabric as though touching it for the first time. I carried a little girl out, Jackson continued, tears now streaming unashamedly down his face. She was so small, so brave. Her arm was badly burned from where a falling beam had trapped her. I got her to the ambulance, but in the chaos, I never knew what happened to her. I've thought about her every day since. The diner had fallen completely silent. Even Rosie stood frozen, coffee pot in hand, witnessing the extraordinary scene unfolding before her. I've been searching for you for 15 years, Jackson said, his voice barely above a whisper now. To know if you were okay. To know if you survived not just the fire, but everything that came after. Amelia stood trembling, memories flooding back of a night painted in orange flames and black smoke, of strong arms carrying her through heat so intense she thought her skin would melt away, of a man's voice telling her to hold on, that she would be okay, that he wouldn't let go. You're the one who saved me, she whispered, recognition dawning in her eyes as the years fell away, and she saw in this powerful man's face the younger version who had risked everything to save a stranger. You're the reason I'm alive. The significance of Amelia's scar ran deeper than the visible tissue that marked her skin. It was the reason she'd been shuffled through 7 different foster homes after losing her parents in that fire. It was why she'd quit high school after relentless bullying, why she'd never allowed herself to be photographed, why she'd given up on dreams that required being seen. May I? Jackson asked gently, his hand hovering near her arm but not touching it without permission. Hesitantly, Amelia nodded, rolling up her sleeve to fully reveal what she had hidden for so long. The scar tissue twisted up her forearm in an intricate pattern, sections where skin had melted and reformed, creating a topography of survival. Jackson studied it with reverence, not disgust. You know what I see when I look at this? He asked, his voice steady now despite the tears that still glistened in his eyes. I see courage. I see endurance. I see someone who walked through fire and came out stronger. Rosie had ushered the last of the curious customers out, flipping the sign to closed, despite it being only mid-morning. She knew something profound was happening in her diner, something that deserved privacy and respect. After I got you to the ambulance, Jackson continued, I went back in for your parents. The firefighters tried to stop me, but I couldn't bear the thought of you waking up alone. His voice broke. I'm so sorry I couldn't save them. Amelia's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank into the nearest chair. No one had ever told her this part of the story. She'd been unconscious when she arrived at the hospital, and by the time she woke, she was already an orphan with no one to tell her what had happened. You tried to save them? She asked, her voice small, like the child she had been. Jackson nodded, sitting across from her, his expensive suit forgotten on the diner's worn vinyl seats. I found your father first. He was unconscious but still breathing. I dragged him as far as the stairwell before the ceiling collapsed. A firefighter got to us then, took him from me. I tried to go back for your mother, but they wouldn't let me. The building was coming down. Amelia closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. All these years, she'd carried not just the physical scar, but the deeper wound of believing no one had tried to save her family, that they had been forgotten in the chaos, left to die alone while she survived. The doctors later told me your father never regained consciousness, Jackson said softly. He had inhaled too much smoke, but they said he didn't suffer. That's the only comfort I could find. How did you know it was me? Amelia asked, looking down at her scar. After all these years? Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he withdrew a small, worn photograph. Because I've carried this with me every day since the fire. He handed her the picture. It showed a much younger Jackson, his face streaked with soot, holding a small girl wrapped in a firefighter's blanket. The child's face was partially obscured, buried against his chest, but her burned arm was visible, cradled protectively in his hand. A news photographer took this before they loaded you into the ambulance, he explained. It ran in the local paper the next day. I tried to find you through the hospital, but patient confidentiality laws prevented them from telling me anything. By the time I hired private investigators, you'd already disappeared into the foster system. Amelia stared at the photograph, at this tangible evidence of the moment her life had changed forever. And suddenly, the scar that had defined her existence in such a negative way transformed before her eyes. It wasn't just a mark of tragedy. It was the connection that had kept this man searching for her all these years. It was the reason he was here now, kneeling before her not with pity but with a reverence that took her breath away. I never stopped looking, Jackson said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. Every year on the anniversary of the fire, I would place an ad in newspapers across the country with this photo, hoping you might see it and reach out. I established a foundation to help child burn victims. I funded research into advanced scar treatments, all in the hope that somehow, someday, it might help you, wherever you were. Amelia looked up from the photograph, seeing this powerful man in a completely new light. Why? She asked, the simple question containing a universe of wonder. Why would you do all that for a stranger? Jackson's answer would change everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. Jackson's eyes met hers, unwavering in their certainty. Because in that moment, when I carried you out of that building, you stopped being a stranger. When someone's life is in your hands, when you feel their heartbeat against yours, something changes. You become responsible for them in a way that doesn't end when you set them down. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. I couldn't save your parents, but I swore I would make sure their daughter had every opportunity to live a full life. Not just to survive, but to thrive. Amelia touched the photograph again, her fingertips tracing the outline of her younger self. I never thrived, she admitted softly. I just existed. The transformation began that very day. After hearing Amelia's story, the years in foster care, the abandoned education, the doors closed because of her appearance, Jackson made a decision that would alter both their lives forever. I have a proposition for you, he said as they sat in the empty diner, cups of fresh coffee between them, courtesy of a tearful Rosie who couldn't bear to interrupt their reunion. My company has a charitable foundation. We need someone who understands firsthand what it means to rebuild a life after trauma. Amelia stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. You want me to work for you? I'm a waitress. I didn't even finish high school. Jackson smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his corporate facade into something more human. Education can be acquired. Your experience, that's something no university can teach. He leaned forward. And yes, I'm offering you a job, but more than that, I'm offering you a chance to help others who bear scars, visible and invisible. The Hayes Foundation for Burn Survivors was launched 3 months later, with Amelia Evans as its executive director. Her first public appearance terrified her. Standing before cameras and reporters, her scar deliberately visible in a sleeveless dress designed by a famous fashion house that had partnered with the foundation. My scar is not my shame, she told the assembled press, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's my story. It's the map that led me here, to a place where I can help others navigate their own journeys through trauma. The headlines the next day weren't about the waitress with the ugly scar. They were about the survivor who was revolutionizing how society viewed visible differences, about the partnership between a CEO and the child he'd saved, now grown into a powerful advocate for change. Jackson stood beside her through it all, not as her savior anymore, but as her partner. The foundation grew beyond burn survivors to encompass all forms of trauma recovery. Amelia completed her education, earned degrees in psychology and nonprofit management, and became a sought-after speaker on resilience and healing. On the 5th anniversary of their chance reunion at Rosie's Diner, Jackson found Amelia standing on the balcony of the Foundation's headquarters, looking out over the city. The building stood on the exact spot where the Westlake Apartments had once been, a deliberate choice they had made together, transforming a place of tragedy into one of hope. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, joining her at the railing. Amelia smiled, no longer self-conscious about the way the expression pulled at the faint scarring that extended to her jawline. "I was thinking about the day we met, the second time, how I spent so many years trying to be invisible. And then in one moment, everything changed." Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life can change in an instant, sometimes for the worse, but sometimes. He gestured to the building around them, to the lives they had touched, to the woman she had become. "Sometimes for the infinitely better." "There's something I've wanted to ask you," Amelia said, turning to face him fully. "That day in the diner, you said you never stopped looking for me. But in all these years working together, you never what?" Jackson prompted when she trailed off. "You never asked for anything in return. You gave me a career, a purpose, a new life. You helped me transform my greatest shame into my greatest strength. But you never wanted anything back." Jackson's expression softened. "Amelia, seeing you become who you are now, that's the greatest gift I could have received. Watching you step into your power, helping others, refusing to be defined by your trauma. That's everything I hoped for when I carried that little girl out of a burning building 15 years ago." Amelia reached out then, taking his hand in hers. The contrast was striking, her scarred skin against his smooth palm. But instead of highlighting their differences, it somehow emphasized their connection, the unique bond forged in fire and reforged in purpose. "What if I want more?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I want a future that doesn't just connect us through the past, but through everything that lies ahead?" Jackson's breath caught, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Amelia, are you saying?" "I'm saying that scars can be beautiful," she interrupted gently. "They can be the beginning of a story, not just the end of one. My scar led me back to you once. I don't want to wait for fate to intervene again." As the sun set over the city that had witnessed both their greatest tragedy and their greatest triumph, Jackson Hayes, the millionaire CEO who had once dropped to his knees in a dingy diner, found himself speechless before the woman who had transformed from a victim to a survivor to a leader. And in that moment, as he drew her close, their shared past gave way to the promise of a shared future. One built not despite their scars, but because of them. The scar that had once defined Amelia's limitations now defined her limitless potential. And the man who had once saved her life now stood beside her as she saved countless others. And, in many ways, as she saved him right back. Some might call their story a fairy tale. But those who knew them, who had witnessed their journey, knew it was something far more powerful. It was a testament to the human capacity for resilience, for connection, and for transformation. It was proof that sometimes, the most beautiful things emerge from the deepest wounds, and that a scar can be not just a mark of what was lost, but a map to everything waiting to be found.